Okay, let's talk about air. Not the hot kind that eschews from my mouth every week, but rather the kind that forces Nerf darts out of your blasters. So when we're talking about improving springers, we're really talking about two main factors in terms of performance. Air velocity and air volume, or how fast the air is moving and how much of it there is. Now, when you're talking about air velocity, really what you're talking about is a spring upgrade. The temptation, of course, when you're looking at improving your FPS is just to slap the biggest spring that you can find into your blaster. However, you've then got to think about the practicality of doing that, because the heavier the spring, the heavier the draw weight, and a heavier draw weight is going to slow you down. And if you've got a really heavy draw weight, then you're going to have to take your aim off your target every time you prime to be able to put that extra effort into priming the blaster. So you need to get the balance between the spring weight for an increased FPS and, how much you can effectively prime without sort of losing things like your rate of fire. When we're talking about budgets, springs are definitely the best bang for your buck in terms of improving the performance of a blaster. You can get them online from specialist suppliers who sell third-party Nerf parts, or if you've got a few springs lying around from different blasters, you can even experiment with doubling or even tripling up springs. My Double Down, for example, has the original stock spring and 2 retaliator springs inside of it, and it works fantastically. Another thing to consider is that if your spring is too heavy, that it may not catch properly. There may be compression issues if you try and sort your own spring out, or even if you use a commercially available spring designed for your blaster, the catch spring may then need upgrading, and even if you go really heavy, that the plastic catch itself may need replacing with a different component. So that if this is your... drop my lid. Once you've improved your spring load and therefore your air velocity, another thing to look at is your air volume. Now, in most cases, it's going to be quite difficult to increase the air volume in a blaster. However, if you've got something like a retaliator or one of the third-party sort of retaliator equivalents, or even if you can make them fit into a different blaster, there are increased plunger tubes out there which will allow you to increase your air volume. Both of these improvements will eventually hit upon a bit of an issue. So let's imagine that you are on a skateboard with your little cap, which all the kids wear, and you're going along. Now, if this represents the timeline of you travelling on your skateboard, and you choose to jump off of your skateboard here, you lose all of this forward momentum. And the same thing is true in a Nerf blaster. Most springers are designed so that if this is your breech with your dart in it, the breech only actually hugs the dart back here. So this is where your air seal is. Now, if we go back to our timeline up here for a minute, essentially what will happen with your blaster is when the air is released, over the course of time, you will have a brief period of acceleration, and then the dart will slow down. Your dart is going to be forced out of this section, and as soon as it leaves that section, any remaining air volume is going to leak out around the dart rather than pushing the dart forwards, effectively leaping off the skateboard prematurely. We lose all of this acceleration. because essentially we're not using our full air volume. And the way around that is to install a brass breech. Now, a brass breech can be as simple as taking a piece of brass and filling the entire breech with it and cutting it off. And that will increase your performance. It really is the next best thing that you can... No, it isn't. If you want to be a little bit more fastidious over it, then you can take a piece of 17/30 seconds brass, like that, and you can shoot your Nerf dart down it. Now, let's say the tail end of your Nerf dart stops there. You then know that your dart was accelerating to halfway between this point and this point, and that after that, the friction from the barrel drag overcame the force of the air behind the dart, causing it to slow down again. So therefore, that is your optimum length of brass. You can even take that a step further by retaining a little bit more of that force, whilst at the same time reducing the barrel drag. So what you would then do is you would take that correct length of 17/30 seconds, and you would slide over the top of that a marginally wider piece of brass. And then you would do the same exercise again of shooting a dart down the 17/30 seconds and then the slightly wider piece. And let's say it stops dead here. You then know that the optimum length for this piece is halfway between here and here, which is about there. So then you have harnessed a little bit more of that air volume to ensure that your dart flies even further. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about practicality. There are a few things to consider when it comes to practicality, taking into account things like using stocks. And during my review of one of the worker stocks, I went into a little bit of detail about my issues with Nerf stocks and in fact what the function of a Nerf stock is, which as far as I'm concerned is a little bit to help with aiming, but aiming's a little bit of a non-entity with Nerf to a certain extent because they're relatively inaccurate, but to brace your shoulder in priming. So, you know, what we're really looking at in terms of practicality for the most part is, you know, more effective ways of priming the blaster. So a stock is one way to improve that, and another way is a pump grip. However, pump grips do come with their own inherent difficulties. And if you're really cool, you have your cap on backwards. In order to install a pump grip onto something like a Retaliator, you have to use something like one of the old N-Strike recon barrels. So effectively, what you have is you have your recon barrel here, and then behind it, where you prime the blaster, you have two bolts and a pump grip. Now, the problem with this is that barrels in Nerf work the opposite way to the way that they do in real firearms. So, what's going to happen is that your dart is going to bounce around inside this length of barrel, creating drag, which is going to slow your dart down, which means that by the time it leaves the muzzle, it is going to be slightly slower than it would have been if you did not have this component installed. So you need to make the decision whether the improvement in terms of practicality, installing a pump grip, is going to outweigh the reduction that you're going to get in terms of FPS, and that really is a very personal decision. The other thing to bear in mind is that most pump grip kits are quite expensive, so you're probably going to be looking at PVC pipe and aluminium bars to make your own, which is a little bit of a feat in itself. If we're talking about budget then, the best thing that you can do to improve the performance of your Springer overall is to put a bigger spring in it. If you do nothing else to your blaster, installing a bigger spring will give you fantastic improvements in performance, and the weight of that spring really is personal preference, and the only way to deal with that really is trial and error as much as anything. Beyond installing springs, the other thing that I would recommend you sort of look into and give a go at doing is installing a brass breech. Now, a length of 17/32 brass comes in at about £5, so it's not going to break the bank, and the performance improvements are definitely worth it. So there you go. That is my very brief overview on the basics of improving the performance and practicality of a Springer blaster. If I've missed anything, if there's anything else that you would like more information on, pop it in the comments and I will try to cover it in another video. Next video will be on flywheelers, and thank you very much for watching.